Not long ago, Sweden was celebrated worldwide as the future of modern society. For decades, it stood as a global model, a place where equality was not just written in law but lived daily. Doors were left unlocked, CCTV seemed unnecessary, and citizens trusted their institutions completely. Schools were world-class, the government functioned efficiently, and the social fabric felt unbreakable. Sweden appeared to have solved society's hardest problems. But slowly, almost silently, cracks began to appear. Today, police refuse to enter many neighborhoods without armed backup. Shootings with automatic weapons, bombings in stairwells, and hand grenade attacks on apartment blocks have become disturbingly common. Criminal gangs, deeply rooted in marginalized immigrant communities, now dictate life in these areas. Those who can afford to leave do. Those left behind live in fear and silence. What began as an idealistic multicultural experiment has fractured the nation, trapping Sweden between pride in its past and dread of its present. Sweden's journey to becoming a model began humbly. At the end of the 19th century, it was one of Northern Europe's poorest countries. Agriculture dominated, but cold weather and poor soil made farming difficult. Extreme poverty drove mass immigration. Between 1850 and 1930, roughly 1.3 million Swedes, almost a third of the population, moved to the United States. Yet from this hardship grew a unique cultural identity built on hard work, discipline, and austerity. When industrialization finally arrived, Sweden was ready. It possessed two major advantages: abundant natural resources and strategic geography. Northern Sweden held some of the world's highest quality iron ore. Vast forests provided timber, and powerful rivers generated cheap hydroelectric power. Access to the Baltic and North Seas made Sweden a key trade hub. The country invested heavily in technology, technical education, and heavy industry. Family-run giants like Volvo and Saab emerged. Crucially, Sweden remained neutral in both world wars. While much of Europe lay in ruins, Sweden's infrastructure, workforce, and economy remained intact. By 1975, it was the fourth richest country globally in GDP per capita. The true foundation of Sweden's success, however, was its culture. Until the 1970s, Swedish society was remarkably homogeneous. People shared ethnicity, language, religion, and social norms. Rules were followed not because of enforcement, but because everyone believed in them. Trust was the most valued commodity. This trust extended to institutions. Swedes believed taxes were well spent, hard work would be rewarded, and the system offered real opportunities. This belief was reinforced by the Folkhemmet, the people's home. It envisioned society as one large family, where everyone was valued and looked after each other. Equality was a moral duty. Solidarity required responsibility. Every person was expected to contribute, behave with integrity, and respect unwritten rules. The model worked because everyone shared the same values, norms, and deep cultural connection. This foundation began shifting in the 1970s. Driven by Olof Palme, a charismatic prime minister, Sweden reoriented itself to become a global moral leader. Palme argued neutrality was no longer enough. Sweden must actively defend the weak worldwide. To be credible internationally, he claimed Sweden had to show compassion at home. This led to a radical policy change in 1975. The Swedish parliament abolished the traditional assimilation model and replaced it with institutionalized multiculturalism. Immigrants would no longer be expected to fully adapt to Swedish culture. Instead, the state would protect their right to maintain their languages, beliefs, and traditions. Immigration was no longer a transitional step into Swedish society. It became a permanent state of cultural preservation. The goal was equal rights, freedom of identity, and peaceful coexistence without demanding uniformity, only mutual respect. Though rooted in goodwill, this dismantled the shared cultural contract that had held the Folkhemmet together. The multicultural policy was implemented aggressively. Schools introduced mother tongue instruction for immigrant children. The government funded cultural and religious associations, ran state media in multiple languages, and designed policies around different cultural frameworks. Sweden welcomed refugees. 25,000 Latin Americans in the 1970s ADS 30,000 Iranians after the 1979 revolution, and thousands from Afghanistan, Eritrea, and Somalia. By the early 1990s, immigrants were still only 2% of the population, but demographics were changing. The Balkan Wars brought over 80,000 refugees from Bosnia alone between 1992 and 1994. By 2000, over 1 million residents, 11% of the population, were foreign-born. The 2000s accelerated this. By 2010, immigrants reached 14.3% of the population. In many urban districts, native Swedes were no longer majority. Segregation, unemployment, and cultural tensions grew impossible to ignore. The breaking point came in 2015, during Europe's migration crisis. Sweden, with just 10 million people, took in 163,000 asylum seekers, the highest per capita rate in the developed world. Most were Syrians fleeing war. Institutions collapsed under strain. Asylum offices overflowed. Sports halls and hotels became emergency shelters. Schools couldn't place new students. Healthcare buckled. By late 2024, immigrants reached 20% of the population, over 2.16 million people. The demographic transformation was massive, but the deeper issue was integration policy. Migrants were placed in deprived areas with scarce jobs and no social connections. Sweden granted citizenship without language tests, job requirements, or rigorous background checks. Only residency duration was needed. From day one, newcomers accessed subsidized housing, free healthcare, education, unemployment benefits, and training courses. These very systems that once uplifted natives became traps. They discouraged self-sufficiency instead of promoting it. A stark example is Iranian immigrants who arrived in the 1980s and 1990s. Many were highly educated middle-class professionals. Yet in Sweden, only 18% found work, earning 35% less than native Swedes. In the U.S., Iranians with similar backgrounds integrated successfully, earning 36% more than Native Americans. The difference wasn't the immigrants, it was the system. In Sweden, 60% of jobs are found through informal networks. Friends, family, classmates. Newcomers lack these connections. Without language skills, references, or social ties, employment was near impossible. By May 2025, foreign-born adults, 20 to 65, had a 12.4% unemployment rate, compared to 3.3% for Swedish-born. Their employment rate was 66.2%, versus 83.4% for natives. Roughly half of non-Western immigrants were either unemployed or stuck in low-paid, sporadic jobs with no future. The vision of seamless integration had failed. The result was two parallel societies. One world had stable jobs, trust in institutions, and future optimism. The other survived on welfare, precarious work, and exclusion. Entire districts, called vulnerable areas, emerged where native Swedes were rare. Swedish wasn't the main language, and criminal gangs enforced their own rules. These zones, officially recognized by police, began as a dozen in the early 2010s. By 2015, there were 55. In 2023, police counted 59, with 17 labeled especially vulnerable, meaning law enforcement could barely operate there. Around 550,000 people, 5% of Sweden's population, lived in these areas. By 2025, the government stopped publishing the list, but internal data confirmed the scale remained unchanged. These neighborhoods were the same ones flagged over a decade earlier, entrenched, not improving. Schools, once Sweden's pride, collapsed under diversity. Students fluent in Swedish were placed with those who spoke none. The hope was proximity would foster inclusion. Instead, standards fell. PISA 2022 scores showed reading declining to 487 points, a significant drop. In vulnerable areas, schools failed entirely. The first generation arrived hopeful. The second generation grew up resentful. They were taught Sweden was equal, but lived segregation and exclusion daily. Violence exploded after 2015. Stockholm's gun homicide rate in 2022 was 30 times higher than London's. Hand grenade attacks, dozens annually, turned residential streets into war zones. Automatic weapons became common in public shootings. Gangs recruited teenagers from excluded neighborhoods. With no role models or opportunities, these youths found status, money, and belonging in crime. The criminal economy generated 100 to 150 billion kronor, roughly $9 to $13.5 billion, yearly. Most alarming was how crime infiltrated the welfare state. Gangs forged documents, created fake identities, set up shell companies, and stole benefits. They didn't operate against the system. They operated off it, siphoning public funds. This destroyed public trust, the core of Swedish society. For nearly 15 years, mid-2000s to late 2010s, Sweden suppressed data linking crime to immigration. Officials argued publishing it might fuel racism. Researchers were denied data. Journalists avoided the topic. Politicians denied problems existed. Ordinary citizens in affected areas knew the truth, but feared speaking, afraid of being labeled racist. Elites, living in safe, homogeneous neighborhoods, declared the system worked. This disconnect bred deep societal fracture. Eventually, public frustration erupted. In the 2018 election, the Sweden Democrats, once a marginal far-right party, won 17.5% of the vote, becoming the third largest force. By 2022, they surged to 20.5%, making them the second most voted party. Polling in 2025 shows them consistently above 20%. Crucially, their new supporters weren't just older rural men. Many were young Swedes who grew up in segregated schools that promoted multiculturalism, yet faced daily conflict, underfunded classrooms, and no future. They felt betrayed. Their vote wasn't ideological. It was a demand for leaders who finally acknowledged reality. Sweden has now changed course. Net immigration has plummeted. In the first half of 2025, the population grew by just 5,000, lowest in decades. Benefit access is tighter. Citizenship now requires language skills. Mandatory preschool for immigrant children was introduced. Political correctness has faded. Media reports crime openly. Politicians discuss ghettos. Yet reversing decades of damage will take generations. You cannot instantly rebuild trust or erase a lost generation. Cities remain divided. Schools remain segregated. Politics remains polarized. A society isn't held together by laws or money alone. It is held together by a shared sense of belonging. When that bond breaks, no wealth or policy can quickly repair it. Sweden's noble dream of a multicultural people's home became a nation of strangers. The lesson is universal. Openness must be paired with integration, compassion with responsibility, and diversity with a shared commitment to the rules of the house.